The spring. My little world is broken. Did you know that there is a little spring who lives inside of a writing pen? I have a story about a spring who lived happily and safely inside of a writing pen. With all the noises he heard coming from outside, he lived his life believing that outside of the world he knew inside of his pen, that there was nothing good. It certainly didn't sound like a quiet and peaceful place out there. Just thinking about leaving his pen made him so scared that he didn't like thinking about it at all. The little spring was quite content to spend his life inside that tiny little home of his. That is, until the unthinkable happened. The ink that he was protecting inside of his pen ran out. He suddenly saw light as the tip of his home was taken off and he started to slide out. Then there was an accident. The spring was flung through the air and landed in the toilet. This was a new wet place that he knew he didn't like. He felt out of place, like he certainly had no use being in there. Terrified, he wondered why this would happen to him. The little spring was flushed down the toilet. He was shoved through pipe after pipe, each time thinking it might be his end. As he was tossed and tumbled so many different directions, he lost all sense of where he might be. During the journey, he did not dare open his eyes out of pure fear, nor did he ever stop crying. It was quite the dizzying experience being tossed this way and that. Swept away by the water, he continued to travel on and on and on with no idea where he may end up. Finally, when everything slowed down, he felt himself floating. He decided to open his eyes and found himself in an even bigger amount of water. It was huge. Of course, he had never seen water before the toilet, so he didn't know what he should call it. What do you think he should call it? What would you call it if you didn't know what water was? When the water stopped pushing him around so much, the spring could see that things had calmed down a bit. He stopped crying and listened to everything he could hear around him. Because sometimes springs can hear, you know. Hearing bird song and wind in the trees, he felt encouraged to look around and see if he could figure out what was making all these strange sounds. What the spring saw was the pure crystal waters of the river. He saw rich green rocks of the riverbed and all kinds of fish of many colors whose skins seemed to dance under the sunlight. Now he understood that the world was much greater than the space inside of his ink pen, that there had always been many things outside waiting to be experienced. The sounds of the flying things in the sky made were beautiful. The little spring spent some time floating around and enjoying all the fish. They were tons of fun, even if they did try to eat him once or twice. The little spring found himself swept up to the bank at the edge of the river and decided he wanted to see more. He used his springiness to bounce himself onto the land and moved into a field of flowers nearby. There, he heard something crying. He followed the sound, which took him to a lovely flower that had been flattened. It could no longer stand up straight and was shaded by all the other flowers around it, so it couldn't get the sunlight it needed. The spring realized that he could help the flower, so he offered to be his support. Keeping things straight and in their place had been his job in the ink pen after all. The flower slowed his tears and let the spring slip onto his stem. The little spring stretched himself out around the bent stalk of the flower until he found a comfortable position to hold the flower up better. There they lived happily together, and they would always laugh when remembering how the spring used to think that all there was to life was being a sad and fearful spring. Turns out, there is far more to the world, and far more things a spring can do than just hold ink inside of a pen. The end. What did you learn from this story about courage, being brave? Everybody gets scared sometimes. Courage is the ability to do something regardless of being a little bit scared of it. Do you think that if the spring had not been so scared, he could have enjoyed his journey to the outside world? Do you think being brave can help you try new things and enjoy the world around you more? Do you think if you had the courage and imagination to try to use something in a different way, that you maybe could come up with fixes for problems no one ever thought of before? Never be afraid to try or experiment. Be the best teammates you can be. Be the best at being you.